Hi everyone, look, we know why you're here. Whether you saw the Italian Grand Prix or not, and if you haven't, go and watch it now. Like us, you want to know more about how we ended up with an AlphaTauri battling a McLaren for victory in a brilliant chase to the finish. We know you don't want to hear any more intro chat from us. Before we crack on, remember to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We've now charged past 350,000 subscribers, and we're grateful to see so many of you showing your support for the channel. And if you hit the notifications bell, you'll never miss another video from us. Okay, I promised we'd get on with this, so let's dive into how Pierre Gasly won a Grand Prix. It could have all been over moments after the start. At the first chicane, Gasly collided with Alex Albon of all people, after being squeezed to the left by Lance Stroll's Racing Point on his inside. The AlphaTauri and the Red Bull made pretty significant wheel-to-wheel contact, which made Albon's car jump into the air briefly and forced him to cut the chicane. Gasly was convinced he had a problem after this, reporting several times over the radio that he must have picked up damage, but the team told him they couldn't see any evidence of this on the data, and eventually he forgot about it and just pressed on. AlphaTauri being in good shape at Monza wasn't a total surprise. The team looked good in low downforce trim a week earlier at Spa as well. But Monza wing levels are even more trimmed out than they are for Spa, so there were shifts in the competitive order, such as McLaren looking much stronger in Italy and Renault and Red Bull not quite as impressive. AlphaTauri made the second biggest lap time gain of all the teams at Monza compared to last year, with only Racing Point finding more time with its copy of last year's championship winning Mercedes. Gasly made it into Q3, but he underperformed when it counted, setting a faster time on used tyres than he did on his fresh set. If anything, 10th on the grid wasn't an accurate reflection of how much pace the AlphaTauri had, as simply repeating his Q2 time would have put Gasly 8th on the grid. Daniel Kvyat complained over the radio when he felt he was being held up by Gasly. Initially he didn't have much of a case, as both AlphaTauris were stuck close behind Esteban Ocon's Renault. But once Gasly fell out of DRS range of Ocon, Kvyat had a point. He was on hard tyres, and after 13 laps he claimed that Gasly's softs were dying just as the hards were coming into their own. 5 laps later, Kvyat piled on the pressure, saying, "Guys, I am losing so much time behind him. Decision time." A lap later, Gasly was called in, releasing Kvyat, but ultimately setting Gasly up to be on the ideal strategy to win the race. Kvyat wasn't quite so chatty on the radio after the race, and clearly didn't take much satisfaction from the role he inadvertently played in Gasly's win. When he was told his teammate had won, he spent the entire slowdown lap back to the pits in silence, and then offered half-hearted congratulations in Parc Fermé. And consider this. Gasly fell behind Ocon when he made a mistake at the second chicane on the opening lap. Without that, he wouldn't have been directly holding up Kvyat, and AlphaTauri might have been less inclined to pit him when they did. When Kevin Magnussen's stranded Haas brought out a safety car immediately after Gasly's stop, Gasly thought it was the worst possible timing. F1's rule that forces drivers to run at a set speed on their way round to the start-finish line allows drivers to make pit stops without losing much time, so in a normal situation Gasly's race would have been ruined. But Magnussen's car was next to a gap in the barriers that wasn't big enough to push a car behind. It was so close to the pit entry that marshals had to push it into the pits, and the pits were closed to allow that to take place. Not only did this save Gasly, it brought the field back together and created the situation that wrecked Lewis Hamilton's race. There were 12 seconds between the pit lane being closed and Hamilton entering, but Mercedes failed to notice any notification from race control as it was preparing for the pit stop, and Hamilton didn't spot a couple of flashing red X's on the outside of Parabolica before he came in. A UK-based Mercedes strategist shouted down the radio at the last second that the pits were closed, but by then it was already too late. While there was some confusion over the signals given by the FIA, including the red X's at trackside, race director Michael Massey said this system is in place at every Grand Prix, and his pre-event notes to competitors made it clear where those red X's would be shown at the final corner. In the past, F1's sporting regulations allowed for flexibility in punishing this offence, but now the rules clearly state that entering a closed pit lane automatically triggers a 10-second stop-go penalty, which immediately took Hamilton out of the running. Hamilton's race was ruined from that point, but the top 3 places in 2020 have often been occupied exclusively by the world champion, teammate Valtteri Bottas and Red Bull's Max Verstappen. This wasn't the case at Monza though. Bottas made another bad start from the front row, falling into the pack and then complaining about the handling of his car. He struggled so much through right-handers on the opening lap he was convinced he had a puncture, but there was nothing obviously wrong. After that, Bottas was stuck. Mercedes hadn't quite got the cooling right for his car, so he was having to manage his engine temperatures, which meant lifting and coasting at the end of straights and pulling out of the slipstream of other cars to get cooler air. That was always going to make overtaking difficult, although there's a nagging feeling that Hamilton would have made more progress from Bottas's position. As for Verstappen, Red Bull just wasn't quick at Monza. He qualified on the 3rd row, made a bad start and didn't have the pace to come back through. He eventually retired with a power unit problem, but there'd not been any signs all weekend that he would have been a contender for victory even in a mixed up race like this. Bottas, Verstappen and perhaps a few other of Gasly's potential challengers had another factor limiting their ability to charge up to him as well. When Mercedes dominated qualifying, the narrative of the Italian Grand Prix weekend appeared to be a story of how the ban on special engine modes had done nothing to blunt Mercedes' challenge. But in a mixed up race like this, the ban did play a part. Several drivers who were out of position couldn't lean on more powerful engine modes to aid their progress through the field, including Bottas and Verstappen. The same also applied to Gasly's main pursuer Carlos Sainz Jr., who we'll come back to in more detail later. Simply put, the lack of engine mode options reduced the tools available to any driver hoping to chase down the unlikely leader. We can hand over the summary of this entry to Lance Stroll himself, who said after the race that it was his to lose. It was, and he did. Stroll hadn't made a pit stop by the time the race was stopped for Charles Leclerc's massive crash at Parabolica, and he was fortunate to benefit from the controversial rule that allows drivers a free tyre change under red flag conditions. That meant he lined up 2nd on the grid for the restart, behind leader Hamilton, who was due to serve a penalty, and he had fresh tyres without having to give up track position to get them. But Stroll made an awful getaway from 2nd, getting wheel spin and saying that grid slot had no grip. He still had no grip when he braked for the 2nd chicane, charging into the runoff area. He drove sensibly after that to pick his way back through to 3rd, but to use his own words again, he had a great opportunity to win this race and it slipped away. Had the race played out normally, Carlos Sainz Jr. was on course to finish 2nd on merit behind Hamilton, and he and McLaren would have been over the moon. However, 2nd place behind Gasly, even though it's still the best finish of Sainz's F1 career, was a result he described as sweet and sour because it ended up feeling like a lost win. McLaren's form at Monza came as a bit of a surprise, even to Sainz, but he'd qualified 3rd on merit with a stunning lap that was so on the edge it left him shaking afterwards. Sainz was quicker than Gasly and hunted him down well after overruling McLaren's advice to be patient in finding a way past Kimi Raikkonen's Alfa Romeo. But once he got to within 1.5 seconds of the leader, the McLaren was badly affected by the dirty air and Sainz's progress stalled. The final laps became a battle to get within DRS range of Gasly. Sainz eventually had to use up more of his battery power to get there, while Gasly was able to save some of his to defend on the final lap when Sainz was finally in range. Sainz only got there when Gasly got a bit ragged in the final lap and a half as his tyres were giving up, but the McLaren ran out of time. Sainz missed out on the win by 0.4 of a second, knowing that had the race been a lap longer he'd surely have won it. Picking out so many factors that came together to put Gasly into a winning position should not overlook the other key thing that won him this race, a brilliant drive once the opportunity presented itself. Gasly led the race for the final 26 laps after Hamilton served his penalty, and his lead was never bigger than 4.3 seconds. To keep his head as Sainz's orange McLaren grew bigger in his mirrors, and to delay Sainz getting into DRS range until the start of the final lap was an assured performance. Gasly might have got a little ragged at the end as Sainz closed in, but he didn't choke, avoiding any sort of major error that would surely have cost him victory. Under that sort of pressure, it showed a level of mental resilience that will surely have impressed those who released him from the pressure cooker of Red Bull racing last summer. We'll come back to that final point in an upcoming video, So keep your eyes out for that one and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that discussion and everything else we've got coming up. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up and tell us in the comments what stood out most to you in this crazy Italian Grand Prix. We're off to catch our breath and then get back to work making more videos for you.